For my comments, I'm asking Jim Reed to come forward and give us an update.
Can I get the slideshow, please? Before we start, thank you, Commissioners. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fire down south in Hanover District. I want to let you know that Mark Quick and Brenda Wazalewski from the Division of Fire Safety and Control from the state are here, as well as Mark Bowler, who's part of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And Chief Tatum is here, a man who's never short of words. I'm sure he has a few things to say to you as well after I'm done. So, Carson Midway Fire. Next slide. Oh, I can do this, right? Yeah, there we go. Here's what time it started, March 16th. We evacuated over 250 residents. We have 2 homes lost, not 3. Initially, we reported 3. What we found out is the third one was actually a foundation, so the home hadn't begun. So we were very fortunate in that. It's unfortunate that we lost 2 homes, but the situation could have been a lot worse. Over 3,000 acres, and we're still currently dealing with the entire fire hazmat at this point. I did take Commissioner Waller and Commissioner Gonzalez out there to see the devastation. Commissioner Waller got to take part, got to eat a lunch that was provided to the firefighters. So he didn't whine too much about it, but he ate it. So I thought that was a good experience for you to go out there and see what actually happens and what we feed our folks out there. I won't read all of this. I'll let you see who was part of all of this. It was quite an effort by the community. When the call came out, everybody, this is the one thing I think that El Paso County has that I have not seen in any other place. If someone calls for help, it comes, and it comes in droves. The fire departments work well together. The 6 different law agencies work well together, and you will just see people come together to make it happen to take care of our county. So that's our biggest strength, I think, here in El Paso County. Just to kind of give you an idea, Incident Command was initially Chief Tatum. Fort Carson obviously came out, and at some point we gave command to Fort Carson through Chief Tatum, through the sheriff to Fort Carson. The thing with Fort Carson, once they took command, that enabled them to bring helicopters and water, food. So that opened up that floodgate, and Carson was a great partner in making sure that we had those things, and they stayed through Sunday when they finally gave it back to Chief Tatum, and the hazmat was turned over to the county. The tire fire. Let's talk about tires real quickly. We've always had a problem. If you know, we have a monofill here, the 2nd largest in the state. There's probably approximately 30 million tires there. What you need to know that car tires, the small ones, produce about 4 quarts of oil. The larger truck tires are about 2 to 2.5 gallons of oil. When these tires burn, you have PCBs, carcinogenics, you have chromium, zinc, you have all the heavy metals that once you breathe those in, they stay with you for life. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So what we try to do is protect our folks. In this particular case, where you see the red line, that was made by bundles of tires, or bales as they call them, and there's over 100 tires in there that are baled, and I'll show you some of how that works. So what you have basically is, you know, you've seen the fire logs that you buy and you put in, and they're paper that have been wrapped really tight. That's kind of what you have with this, but instead you have a petroleum product that's burning. The smoke there is extremely toxic. So you'll see the air packs on our hazmat team. Now keep in mind, we had Air Force Academy there, Security Fire Department. We had several fire departments that came in to help us try to cool this pile down. We had a unified command initially. These are all the different things that happened when we went through. I don't think that that's our grader. I think that's someone else's. Our grader operators were down there. Our Department of Public Works provided water. On the tire fire itself, we put almost 50,000 gallons of water on this fire. They're your tires that are on fire now. These are hard to put out. These are extremely difficult to put out. The black smoke, extremely poisonous. You have to be careful. Grass fire that we had going on, just to give you an idea because it's so dry. It's going uphill. There's Fort Carson's helicopter with buckets. Again, the tire fire. You see the heavy black dense smoke that's going on. This is where they dropped it straight on the tire fire. It didn't do anything. This is an outbuilding that was lost, a garage. This is some of the devastation you'll see out there. We sent our damage assessment team in immediately. They were able to finish that Saturday to come back. Mr. Schleicher went out with his team Monday. This hurts my heart. These are 1945, 1950 tractors that burned up. Here's our tires and the bales. This is day 2. Here are our guys trying to cool it. It's hard to put it out. We tried foam, was ineffective, biodegradable foam. And so the goal was to cool it, to try to extinguish the fire. You know, you have the 3: fire, oxygen, and fuel, heat, oxygen, and fuel. So we tried to cool it to no avail. It was just too hot. And we spent 2 days working on a very small section, maybe a 150-foot section, and come Sunday afternoon, it's like we hadn't even touched it. We thought we had it extinguished, and it came back. Last night, about 11 o'clock, we turned this fire over to the EPA. Through the efforts of Chief Tatum and Mark Quick, we were able to get the EPA to come out and take charge of this fire. So we transferred this to the EPA to manage, and we'll be back out there today to see what kind of resources they need. If you wouldn't mind, I'll let Tom Gonzalez talk to you about some of the health issues real quick, if that's okay with you. Yes, sir.
Before you do that, can you talk about how the designation of authority gets transferred and bounces around from I think that's something that the public should be aware of.
Absolutely. Title 32 gives the fire chiefs responsibility for fires within their fire district. Once that fire chief is overwhelmed, then they go to the sheriff's office because the sheriff can bring state resources to that fire. So at some point, and it was a very short point, a few seconds, where Chief Tatum turned it over to the sheriff, and the sheriff in turn turned it over to Fort Carson. So now Fort Carson has authority, and they basically unified. They're not actually a unified command at that point, but they're working together to extinguish that fire. So we brought in some state resources through Mark Bully, which was the Division of Fire Safety and Control, and Fort Carson brought in several resources. You see the helicopters, just to give you an idea, Chinook is about $6,000 to $7,000 an hour. Okay, that's what it costs to run one of those helicopters. So Carson brought in food, water, and people. At some point, once Carson had it, when it got to the point to where the Chief Tatum could handle the fire at that point, that responsibility was then turned back through a delegation back to Chief Tatum, and Chief Tatum took control of the fire area. We, El Paso County, because we are the designated emergency response authority for hazmat, maintain responsibility for the hazmat because the chief doesn't have the capability for that. So it's a transition. It expands and then it contracts as it goes forward.
Commissioner Waller.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, and I see we've got a pretty good picture of the tire fire here on the other side of the blue house. But I think unless you're out there and can see it up close, it's hard to understand and appreciate just the complexity and difficulty related to putting this portion of the fire out. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind going into some of the details about, just how much fuel is there, how big of an area we're looking at, why our current efforts aren't being successful, and maybe what the EPA is going to do. I mean, my assumption is they're probably just going to let it burn out. I don't know that there's a better option, but if you could just kind of expand on that, I'd appreciate it.
So when the tires are bundled, there's very little air between the tires, and that goes back to that fire triangle: air, fuel, and heat, correct? So when the tires are bundled, there's very little air between the tires and the fuel itself. So what you have there is surface burning. What you have is the tires were heated up to where the rubber is putting up enough heat to create a gas which is flammable, which is what's going on. You have a petroleum product. So what we tried to do initially was to cool the surface of those tires to eliminate the fire. Unfortunately, tires have steel belts, right? They're radial tires. So that is heated up so hot that those things are actually popping and maintaining heat. We just couldn't we put 50,000 gallons of water on maybe a 150-foot section. This is a 300-yard long tire fence. So the hazmat team, knowing because of the heavy metals in the air, this is a hazmat, and because of the oil that it produces, it's a hazmat. What we tried to do was cool it, get it to cool down, or the other option is to leave it burn. If we break it open, we expose all that fuel all at once, we expand the area that fire will grow, and we add a lot of oxygen to it. So anything that you have bundled up when you cut it and it opens up, like the mattresses that you buy today, the foam mattresses, right, all the air sucked out of them, they're hard as a rock, and they come to you about like a thing like this. As soon as you cut that bag, it expands. That's exactly what would happen with these tires. So for us, the option was to keep them close tight and try to limit the amount of fuel that was exposed all at once. The flames you see here went on from Friday night till Saturday morning. We just wanted it to burn down. EPA now has looked at that. The homeowner next door has been nothing less than miraculous. He has done a lot of work. He's built a pit for us. As we cool off tires, we'll take those tires that are out and put those in the pit and continue to build it. If we have to put water in the pit, we're taking water and adding it to the hazardous material. What we try to do is restore that. So we have a retention pond that's built to retain any runoff. Well, it's so dry, folks, 50,000 gallons of water didn't even make a dent. I mean, we have very little mud. So it's a process. It's a very long process. So you can engage. The concern I have, though, is I don't want to take lives and risk poisoning them or killing them or hurting them in any way when I'm not saving lives. It would make sense to remove people from the area into a safe area, relocate them. Red Cross has been wonderful in doing that. Through Cindy Casero, she's coordinated that. The thing is, we want to relocate them out of the area so that they're not exposed to this hazardous chemical, and I don't have to expose first responders to it. If there were lives at risk, that's one thing, but this is not. So sometimes doing nothing is doing something, and that's the key thing when it comes to these type of hazmats.
Well, I think it's also important to understand again, the magnitude of this. This is a fence, basically, that goes around like a 5-acre property, completely surrounding the property, that's made of these bales. You know, the bale might be, 6 or 8 feet wide. 2 bales are stacked on top of each other. There are 100 tires per bale.
That's correct.
So in a 6 or 8 foot span, you have 200 tires. Each tire has 2.5 quarts of oil in it, and so in a 6 or 8 foot span, you're looking at 500 quarts of oil.
Easily. That's correct.
Minimum that's burning.
That's correct. And that's not to mention in this black smoke, you have the heavy metals that impact your lungs and those sorts of things. And as you've seen our firefighters in the earlier picture, they had air packs on. So we made sure that everyone was protected. But at some point, you have to say, you know what, it's probably best to let it burn itself down to the ground and then clean it up afterwards. And that's kind of where we're at. The EPA took it over last night about 11 o'clock, 11:30. We'll go back down there today to see what we can do to help them. And the other challenge with this area, and it's a big challenge, there's no street lights and there's no fire hydrants. And there's very few wells in this area, so water has to be brought in. And that's a huge challenge.
Commissioner Vanderwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. So with the EPA evaluation, are they going to be taking a look at this to determine if we've got what kind of environmental damage we have or what kind of a cleanup process we're going to have? Because obviously if we've got these chemicals, now many of them, perhaps the heavy metals, they might have been released in the atmosphere and they're gone. But then there's going to be what's left over on the ground. So are they doing that kind of evaluation?
So the first thing we've asked them to do is protect life. So we've asked them to put out monitors to figure out how far this toxic plume has gone. There may be a potential for evacuating more homes until such time that there's no more flame and that's not happening. So that's the first thing we asked them to do. They're doing that this morning. They're sending out meters to kind of measure the air quality in the area. And that right now we've got it at a 1/4 mile. That could expand to 1/2 mile. I don't know until we go down there and see the data. That's the first step they're doing. The second step they'll do is they'll start putting the fire out and controlling the material itself. Once that's done, and they have a permanent place where we can bury them or whatever we do with them, whatever they decide to do with them, then they'll look at the toxicity of the ground and how it's impacted the ground, and then they'll address that issue. The other thing we've asked them to do is kind of go through the neighborhood because tires seem to be prevalent throughout the entire neighborhood. And I'm sure this was in the early 90s that this happened. So we need to clean those up and address those. So they've been absolutely wonderful. And I can't tell you, I know Lonnie and his team has done a great job with coordination. The state has been a wonderful partner. We've been very fortunate to have these folks. And Red Cross has been right there. Sheriff's Office has been with us the whole way. So we've been very fortunate to have what we have.
Thank you.
Commissioner Littleton.
Thank you. And I think you may have kind of touched on this and addressed it, but whether it's on public property or whether it's on private property. And if on private property, if the tires are on private property, were they permitted? Were they allowed there? Or how did we get them there?
So, Commissioner, you know, about a decade ago, a little bit longer than that, the state addressed their waste tire issue.
Right.
And they created a waste tire board, which obviously I was a part of
Right.
for that 5 years it was active. This was prior to that. And I believe the homeowner said he had bought the bales at $11 a bale. It was a deal. And so they were trying to reuse the tires rather than just have them sit in a monofill.
Right.
Good idea at the time. Yeah, not so good now that we understand what we're up against when we have to deal with the fire on it. So.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to head out and would invite the media to go down and take a tour at 10:30 at the Cheyenne Mountain Shooting Complex if you'd like to come down.
Have fun. Okay, continue.
Okay, can I get Tom Gonzalez
Sure,
up here for a
please, thank
second
you.
real quick? And then I think Chief Tatum has a few words to say. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. Tom Gonzalez, Deputy Director, Public Health. I, too, attended the meeting Sunday with the commissioners and Jim Reed, had staff out there as well as on Saturday. Well, from a public health perspective, a couple things we're looking at here. Those that are re-entering, we want to make sure we have safe cleanup. When you're looking with ash and debris, we learned this from Waldo and Black Forest. There's many asbestos, there's many heavy metals, there's hydrocarbons within this ash. So we want to make sure folks take all precaution. We're working with the Red Cross. They have cleanup kits where they have N95 masks, they have gloves, they have other gear for folks to protect themselves. We've learned getting ash on your skin can cause irritation. So we want folks to really, before they go out cleaning out their outbuildings and other losses that they experience, to get with us at Public Health or Red Cross and let's get them a kit. We want to make sure they're being safe. Number two, tetanus. Definitely if you're behind on your tetanus shot, well, come see Public Health. We'll work with you getting a tetanus shot. If you have any questions, our phone number is on our website at www.elpasocountyhealth.org. We'll help you determine if you need your tetanus shot. Lastly, talking about the tires. We've been heavily involved from an air quality standpoint. First, what you're really looking at is sodium, the dioxides that are being emitted, and the hydrocarbons. So those are the things that they're monitoring out there right now, and that's EPA. We're trying to determine a safe zone. And we know that quarter mile right now, we know that's a hard zone. That's where you have these dioxins, those other compounds that are being released. But how far to keep folks safe? We do know if folks, these hydrocarbons cause irritation to the eyes, to the throat, and the lungs. If you're experiencing that, get out of there. Seek your medical provider, because your body's telling you something, that you're being irritated by that smoke. Also, the second part of it is the actual release of the oil and the environmental conditions there. As Jim Reed said, we don't have water running off with these hydrocarbons and other heavy metals. That's the good news. Now with EPA there, and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment will also be on scene to determine the extent of the contamination. So that will be ongoing and forthgoing. But as Jim Reed said, first thing is to determine a safe zone away from that smoke. So that's really what we're doing from a public health standpoint. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Carl Tatum, Fire Chief from Hanover Fire Department. And I'll sign in just a second here. To kind of give an update on how fast this was progressing a little bit. 9:47 is when we went into service from a smoke investigation perspective. At 9:50, we reached out and talked with Fort Carson, and they did have a fire at the range 155. We was on scene overlooking the fire on Fort Carson approximately 10 o'clock. And 10:39, the fire was still on Fort Carson. We was looking at strategic plan, or a trigger point on that fire to see where we're going to start doing pre-evacuations and calling in additional resources. 10:39, we had two command SUVs, 3 Type 6s, and a 3,000-gallon tender on site. At 10:49, it hit that trigger point, and we started pre-evacuations from a mile from Chaps View to Outback, a mile east. We requested the Pikes Peak Mutual Aid Coordinator, requested County DOT for heavy equipment. At 10:51, fire jumped Fort Carson's fence, requested CSU Wildland, Fountain Fire, Stratmore Hills Fire, both structural and wildland protection. At 11:01, we requested animal control, large animal evacuation. Also asked the EOC to be stood up, Red Cross for evacuation centers to be set. 11:03, law enforcement for evacuations was requested. At 11:04, we expanded that from a pre-evacuation to a mandatory evacuation from Chaps View to Outback View, 2 miles east. 11:06, MA1 came up online, and at that point in time requested 5 structural engines, 5 more tenders, 8 more Type 6s or Type 3 brush trucks. Between 11:30 to 12 o'clock that afternoon, we had approximately 4 command SUVs on site. Divisions started being set up. Lookouts were in place. 10 Type 6 / Type 3 brush trucks on scene, 3 tenders, 5 structural engines. These numbers did not include Pueblo County. This is just what's coming out of El Paso County. OEM was stood up and coordinated everything that we needed and had a person on site assisting in resources. EPSO coordinated the evac and securing the area to let the firefighters do what they needed to get done. We had a number of El Paso County DOT, Pueblo DOT, state DOT equipment on site, cutting fire lines and heavy equipment, contractors arriving on scene with water tenders and heavy equipment. Fort Carson started deploying their resources as well about 12:30. By 1600 that evening, when I turned over the fire to Fort Carson, we had 200 to 225 firefighters and law enforcement on scene, not including what OEM had in place, multiple DOT resources, private heavy equipment resources, and a number of animal control units on locations. Things that we need to work on as a county, as an organization. Communications between PPRs, CN, allowing Pueblo to be on the C-zone talk groups. That was a systematic failure at all proportions when we couldn't talk to our next door neighbor to communicate back and forth. They was on the MAC channels. Fort Carson was on their 400 systems and we're on our C-zone talk groups. There wasn't enough MAC channels to communicate with Pueblo County. We started merging those resources in, tying them into C2 command channel on our radios. The other issue that we was coming into was we was killing the system. The PPR-CN radio communication system was at its max. We tried to go over to VTAC systems, which they are repeated. Unfortunately, in that area with the hills, and as you guys have seen, and the terrain that we had, we couldn't communicate on those. So we had to stay on the C-zone talk groups, the repeated talk groups, which in turn crashed the system. We had the command structure of the fire. This is a big issue that I think was just more of a misstep on our parts, but I did not know that Pueblo County and El Paso County was working on delegation authorities. I did not have, and giving it over to Fort Carson. I did not relinquish the command until we realized that that was what was going on, and we turned it over to the sheriff's office. At no time did I have a sheriff's office or county marshal representative in the ICP. I had sheriff's offices out there, deputies out there that was doing the evacuation and securing the location, but I did not have a representative in the ICP as a unified command. At that point in time, I was thinking that I was doing this on the first mutual aid for the first operational period. I did not know until the IC Type 3 arrived on scene and said, hey, this is what's being worked behind the scenes and we should have it completed by 4 o'clock, and that's the reason why we turned it over at that time at 4 o'clock. I think that's a big misstep moving forward on these large-scale events is if the sheriff is going to take it or if the county is going to take the fire, then we need to have a smooth transition over. But basically it went from me really quick through the sheriff right into IC I see as a type 3. So there was really no transition on the county's part at all. The trash pits, you guys kind of seen those a little bit in there. We need to have a real conversation on getting the commissioners to put some teeth in some legislation. The health department, it's a civil issue. It's not a criminal issue, it's a civil issue. It's just like with the fire department, it's a civil issue. If we want to take these landowners to court, it's a civil issue. There's nothing in statute right now that forces these people. These are all in dry wetlands. When we have a torrential downpour on Fort Carson Highway 115 in our area, these all fill up. All of these here goes to Fountain Creek. All this trash, all of the debris that is burning underground, all of those metals that Jim Reed was talking about is burning right now underground, and the trash and stuff, that is being dumped into Fountain Creek. It may not happen today. It may not happen 2 or 3 years from now, but eventually this material will end up in Fountain Creek. The other thing is during wildland fires, when we find this stuff, Commander Reed or Jim Reed talked about that a little bit. That's marijuana, just stuff that was dumped out there. It's a hazmat situation. They're dumping tires, trash, plastic, TVs, whatever they're dumping in there, it's toxic. It's killing. That's the reason why the firefighters are having a huge issue right now with cancer rates. When we're fighting wildland fires, we don't have the protection of the SCBAs and stuff to go into those things, and we don't know that they're there until we stumble across them. Moving forward where we're at, Jim Reed talked about the waste tire facility. I've already contacted them yesterday morning. I've given them until the end of next week to cut 3 to 4 blade links outside of their gates to give us a fire barrier, plus two blade links inside their facility to cut all vegetation down inside their facility. To get the tires below grade, a minimum of 2 feet, they're shredding those tires right now. We also have contracts still in place with CER with a 2-hour recall of their contractors. I also have waste management on site. They will shut down their facility, we will shut down the roads, and we will start moving their equipment across the road to start covering those pits if they become hit with fire. We'll utilize our cold fire and our water stuff right now to cool the pits to the east or west of those facilities if that's what's needed. I have also reached out to OEM, Hazmat, federal EPA, and state Division of Fire Safety to sit down and look at our fire plans, because what we know now is our plans are ineffective for the tire fires that we're facing right now today, and that's 100,000 tires. Jim alluded to that we've got about 30-some million tires there. I think that number has went up a little bit, and I think we're about at 45 million tires. Even though we have shredded about 100 tons a week, I think we're still at about 45 million tires there. Right now, that order that I gave to CER is a knee-jerk reaction given what we know right now that we're fighting out there. But it's something we've got to harden that facility, and they understand that we need to harden that facility. And now that we know what we do know, we're going to bring the players together and to try to figure out how we can make sure that something like we have with the tire fence will never happen inside that facility as long as they're shredding those tires. So do you guys have any questions for me?
Questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. So, thank you, Carl. Chief, I just wanted to thank all the, again, the department for the great work you guys did in working the response, and highlight some of the difficulties. We haven't really talked about some of that is out there where this fire happened and started and spread out was you've got roads that are difficult to get around on. There's no water there. The homes there in that area, that community is an area where they have cisterns, and so water is trucked in. So largely you're bringing in tenders to to fill the water bladders, and then those were being utilized for fighting the fires. So it makes it very difficult, of course, not being in a city environment or a town environment where you have fire hoses, fire hydrants. So I just wanted to highlight some of those difficulties. And then, unfortunately, it was a high wind day as well, so it made it very difficult to fight. So I just wanted to thank everybody in the Hanover Department for the hard work you guys did, because you guys were working this in all the fire departments under difficult situations. So thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner. I will reiterate that Waste Management, they have their pond set out there, and they gauged the pond Monday when I talked with them, and we used about 1.5 million gallons out of their pond alone, not including what we pulled out of the hydrant systems from Wigwam Water and what we pulled from Colorado Springs Utilities facility as well. So all together, we probably used about 2 million gallons of water on this fire, not including what Fort Carson pulled off of their installation during banding buckets.
Okay, Jim?
Just a quick follow-up. We've asked the EPA to gauge the other dump areas that Chief Tatum is referring to. And keep in mind, when you have a fire that is that fast moving, law enforcement was really focused on the evacuations to get that done. So understand that during such an event, you may have some confusion. It's called controlled chaos, and this is what we deal with, and we're able to recover quickly. So I think they did a phenomenal job on that.
Well, this is the reason why I'm bringing it up. We're not having public comment. I would write that down for public comment for your session. But what we're going to, this is more of a report item. What I do want to happen and why we are doing this in public is we continually to debrief, and we want to make improvements. What I would like to see happen, and with the support of my colleagues, is for you to bring back a list of those action items that we need to work on. Bring that back. We'll schedule that as a department and committee report so that we can follow up, because I want to make sure we have a plan of action to address those particular issues so that they aren't lost. But I want to use this situation, and again, I think Commissioner Littleton and other of my colleagues mentioned the fact that we are heading into some aggressive times, and we need to be very proactive. And I want to make sure that we have a very open and transparent process so that we can make sure people are aware of the dangers and concerns that are there, but that they can start planning ahead. But this is important stuff. So thank you. Commissioner Vanderway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, also thank you for everything you all have done. And I mentioned earlier about the concern that I have about the kind of fire risk season it looks like we're going to have this summer. I'm very concerned about it. So I would encourage every citizen to be as prepared as they possibly can, because we're going to have, unless we have some big weather events that bring a lot of water and moisture into our community, we're going to have more fires. We're definitely going to have them. So there are several websites where there's information available, but I'm going to talk about the El Paso County website very briefly. So on the El Paso County website, in the emergency the Office of Emergency Management section, there is information about a wildlife preparedness workshop for neighbors and neighborhoods in Cascade on May 5th. There's also a guide to preparing for wildfire. There's also a guide for storm preparedness, and that could still happen to us here. There's digital kits for people to help them prepare to evacuate. There's a flash flood preparedness guide on there. There's a make a plan, pack a kit information on tips on how to be ready to evacuate. And there is information about other classes, and there's also a lot of other resources regarding preparedness and recovery. And then there's also links to national preparedness pages. And again, this is our county website. This is paid for by the taxpayers. This is a resource available for citizens to use, and I would encourage you to go on this website and other websites and make sure you're ready and prepared in case you need to evacuate from your neighborhood, so that you know what to bring with you, how to be ready, who to call, and there are courses and classes available to help you be ready for that, because I think we're going to have one heck of a summer fire season. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any last minute comments? Okay, so when you have an update for us, Jim, as far as when we can get that scheduled, let us know. But we want to, again,
Yeah.
make sure that we give you time to document that, but then we want to lay out a plan of action to fixing that.
Yeah, it'll be a couple weeks, Commissioner, because we have to bring in all the parties to go through the complexity of the event itself. But we will get an after-action report to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.